class, Mr. Rasmussen here. This is Lesson 11C, and in Lesson 11C we're going to be looking at nephrons and urine formation. The nephron is the microscopic part of the kidney. It's the smallest part of the kidney, and its job is to create urine and filter blood. So we're going to look at, first we're going to start off by looking at the anatomy of a nephron, so you need to know all the parts of the nephron. And then we're going to look at urine formation, and you need to know all the steps of urine formation and what part of the nephron does each step. So that's what you should know from the end of this lesson. First, we're going to look at the anatomy of that nephron. If we look at a nephron, I'll bring up a picture of it here. The main job of the nephron is to filter blood. We want to take all the waste and all the things that we want out of our blood. And the job of the nephron is to do that. Now, the nephrons are microscopic. They're tiny. There's actually about 1 million of them in every kidney. So you have about 1 million little filters working all the time to filter your blood in your kidney and to create urine. So we're going to look at those little pieces. Now, the important part of this is where they are located. So if we look at a kidney here, we notice here that they put a box around this area. So this area contains two parts. It contains this outer part here, which is the cortex. So part of the nephron we're going to find in the cortex, and part of the nephron is actually going to be located in the medulla, in those medullary pyramids here that I'm outlining here. So we're going to find some of it in the cortex and some of it in the medulla. And if I draw a little arrow here, this is sort of a rough estimate of where you'd find it. This tube is actually going to continue onwards here. What's up here would be found in the cortex region of that kidney, and what's down here would be found in the medulla region of that kidney, and this tube would extend down into the medulla. And that's really important. But this is kind of a kidney, I'm sorry, this is our nephron here, and that's where it's located, in the cortex and in the medulla. And we're going to zoom in on this here and look at the anatomy of what a nephron looks like. So here's our anatomy of a nephron. Once again, you need to know all the pieces of this. So here's the nephron. And the nephron has a bunch of parts. First off, it has a blood supply that goes into the nephron. That blood supply is called the afferent arteriole. Then there's blood that exits the nephron, and that's called the efferent arteriole. A good way to remember that is the E, exit has an E, efferent has an E. So that's how it goes. It goes in the afferent and out the efferent. And where the blood goes is it goes into this little part called the glomerulus. And the glomerulus's job is to filter the blood. So right here in the glomerulus is where they filter the blood. Then surrounding the glomerulus is this tissue called the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule. Anything that gets filtered out of the blood is going to get caught in that Bowman's capsule. Then where the filtrate goes from there is it goes to a twisted tube called the proximal convoluted tubule. And then after the proximal convoluted tubule, it goes into this huge loop that dips down into the medulla region, and that's called the loop of Henle. And then after the loop of Henle, we have this region here, which is called the distal convoluted tubule. And then after the distal convoluted tubule, finally we have the collecting duct. So those are the parts you need to know. You need to know the afferent and efferent arterioles, the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. Those are the parts of the nephron. We're going to learn what each part does and the steps of urine formation here. So this is urine formation. What's going to happen in this nephron to produce your urine? And I got to be honest, it's not as simple as you may think it is. It's not like, oh, we just get rid of the bad stuff in the blood and we make urine. There's lots going on with this nephron and this urine formation, and we'll take it step by step. So the first thing that happens is what we call pressure filtration. And we're going to use pressure or blood pressure to filter the blood. And that happens in the glomerulus. So what happens here is blood is going to come in the afferent arteriole, and it's going to go through the glomerulus, and in there you're going to get some pressure filtration. That blood pressure is actually going to push the harmful substances out of the blood, but keep the blood cells and the other big things in. So anything that's large is going to stay in. Cells, proteins, all of that should stay in the blood and should leave through the efferent arteriole. but all the small particles should get filtered out and go into the Bowman's capsule, which is going to catch the filtrate, and then it's going to send it down the proximal tubule. So the first part is pressure filtration. The second part of urine formation after that is selective reabsorption. So our pressure filtration is not amazing. It doesn't do a good job of picking out exactly what should be filtered and what shouldn't. It's just going to filter anything. Anything and everything that's small. Well, there's a lot of stuff in our blood that we want to keep that's small, or in our blood or in our urine that's small that we want to keep, like minerals and sugar, glucose, stuff like that. So in step 2, we're actually going to reabsorb some of that stuff we don't want to get rid of. So this happens in the proximal convoluted tubule. And if we look, there's our glomerulus and there's our proximal convoluted tubule. And as we see these different things here, they are going to move across. So what happens is as our filtrate here moves down, when it gets into the proximal convoluted tubule, anything we want to keep is going to get reabsorbed into our capillary system or into the blood flow that sort of wraps around this glomerulus. So things that we're going to keep are going to be things like sodium, glucose, and amino acids. So that's step 2. We're going to reabsorb things that we want to keep in our blood. The third step is tubular secretion. We're actually going to do the same process brought in reverse, and we're actually going to get rid of some things that got kept, that they shouldn't have gotten kept. So tubular secretion happens in that distal convoluted tubule. And what we're going to secrete back into the blood is additional waste. So here's that third step here, tubular secretion. And we're going to remove additional waste from the blood, and we're going to put them into the filtrate. And this happens in that distal convoluted tubule. So in that distal convoluted tubule, we are going to re-secrete waste that we want to get rid of. Toxins or things that we don't want in our blood, we're going to secrete them into it. Those are the 3 steps. The fourth one's big, and it'll take some time to talk about. The fourth one is water reabsorption. So our kidneys, we need to conserve water. We are land-based mammals. We don't live in water. We don't have an infinite supply of water around us. So we, in order to be successful, have to keep some of that water in our body. So we needed a system that allows us to keep some water and to reabsorb some of that water so we're not getting rid of all of our water all the time. If we're a fish, we can urinate out ammonia and we can get rid of lots of water. We don't have to worry about it because we live in water. So we don't really have to conserve water because it's not really something that's running out for us. But as human beings, we had to learn to conserve water, and so we have to reabsorb a lot of that water that got filtered out so that we don't lose it. And this is going to happen in 2 places in the kidney. It's going to happen in the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. And the way it does it is fairly fascinating. Fairly fascinating. The big thing I want you to keep in mind is this idea of osmosis. How water is always going to move where there's more salt. So if we have more sodium somewhere, the water is going to be sucked towards that sodium. We're actually going to use increasing levels of sodium to suck water out of our urine. And that happens a lot in the medulla. Remember those little medulla pyramids? That's where it's going to happen. Not in the cortex, but in the medulla. And that's where we're actually going to pull a lot of water out. And I'll sort of show you a big complicated picture of how that happens next. All right, so let's not get confused by what's going on here. This shows a lot of stuff. It shows us that filtration happens in the nephron, or in the glomerulus here, and that filtrate goes into the Bowman's capsule. And then we have reabsorption here, that second step, in the proximal convoluted tubule, right? But down here, this is where we have water reabsorption. And it happens in 2 places. It happens, I said, in the loop of Henle and in the collecting duct. Those 2 parts that dip down into the medulla. And here's how it works. If you look down here, here's the important thing. Permeability to water. Up until about right here, the descending loop of Henle, because it goes down, it's descending. Up until about the ascending loop of Henle, there's a huge, high permeability to water, which means water can leave the cell walls really easily. But over here in the ascending loop of Henle, there is zero permeability to water. So water cannot move through these walls. Okay, so water cannot go through there. So what happens is, as it goes down the descending loop, the concentration of sodium around it increases. So the concentration of sodium around it is going to increase. So what happens is, as water or as urine goes down here, it gets put into an environment that has more and more sodium, and it's going to pull more and more water. We can see that here. It's going to pull more and more water out. Well, after it gets down here and starts going up the ascending loop, because we're going up again, it's no longer permeable to water. So water should want to come back into it from here, but it doesn't because these walls are impermeable to water. So we go down and we use all this salt to suck out water. And then as we go up, we actually pull out something else. We actually pull out more salt. So we actually pull out more salt to make water want to come out even more. So we're going to pull out more salt out of the urine to keep the salt so we can use it to pull out water. So then when we go down here, the same thing happens. We go down into the medulla, and as we go down, the salt increases. So the salt concentration increases. And as you can see here, what's pulled out is more water, because the salt concentration down here is really high. And as that salt concentration increases, more water wants to come out of the urine. And so water is going to come out in these two places that they dip down into the medulla, the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. So that's where reabsorption of water happens. And we use salt and osmosis to do it. Just kind of an overview of everything, a little simpler picture. We have pressure filtration is step one, and that takes place right here in the glomerulus. After that, we have tubular reabsorption, where we are actually going to reabsorb some substances back into the blood that we want to keep, and that happens in this proximal convoluted tubule. Then we have tubular secretion is step three, and that takes place in the distal convoluted tubule. And finally, we have reabsorption of water, which takes place in the loop of Henle, and it uses increasing salt concentration to draw water out, and then it uses impermeable walls to keep the water out, and then as we get to this collecting duct, it's going to draw even more water out because of that increasing salt concentration. So that's our formation of urine. It happens in those 4 steps, not too difficult. Make sure from this lesson you know the 4 steps of urine formation and you know the anatomy of a nephron. That's been this lesson, class. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Have a good day.